Yes, sir. And before that, Mayuri, can you just give a small welcome note?
Sure.
Yeah. Before starting the session, I would like to request all the participants to submit your names and email IDs in Transplant Coordination in India, the Unique Ethical Challenge. I, Mayuri Barge, Transplant Manager of Dr. D.Y. Patil Hospital and Research Center, and a proud Director of Department of Surgical Gastroenterology at Jaslok Hospital and Research Center, Mumbai, is a surgical gastroenterologist with a special interest in hepatopancreatobiliary surgery and liver transplantation with over 35 years plus experience at the cutting edge of his field. He is also Doyen of Medical Ethics. He is the publisher and the member of editorial board of the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics and the chairperson of the Forum of Medical Ethics. He is co-chair of the Declaration of Istanbul Custodian Group, an international organization working on the transplantation ethics. He has served as a joint secretary of Zonal Transplant Coordination Committee, Mumbai, from 2012 to 2017. Besides this, Sir has around 110 publications in Index Journal and has contributed 4 textbook chapters. In addition to this, he is also the co-editor of the book Healers or Predators: Healthcare Corruption in India, published by Oxford University Press in 2018. Dr. Nagral sir is thus uniquely qualified to educate and sensitize all of us on the unique ethical challenges that are associated with the transplant coordination in India. I request Dr. Sanjay Nagral sir to share his vast experience and knowledge with us on this beautiful evening. Over to you.
Hear me?
Yeah, sir.
Okay, great. Okay, that would begin. Um, now, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Now it is clear, sir.
Is this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you're seeing my slide, right?
Yes, sir.
So first of all, if anytime during the talk you can't hear me, or if you can't see the slides, please let me know. Please interrupt me because I'm not getting feedback. I think I should also start with a small apology for last time. I was to give this talk last Saturday, but I was stuck at the last minute. So please accept my apologies for that, and I hope I can partly make up. Now, as you've seen, the title of my talk is you can say longish and little detailed. Then I have to give a talk on transplantation ethics. There are many things one can talk about, but I think we'll try and focus a little on our situation as we see it unfolding every day in India. So my talk is in 2 parts. The first part is little general slides on what is ethics all about, a little bit on that, a little bit on the importance of ethics in transplantation. Why is it that we should discuss this? A little bit on the peculiar issues in India. So those, of course, all of you will identify with in some with very clearly. Finally, I have 3 or 4 case scenarios which we can discuss and then sort of open out for discussion amongst all of you. So that's the plan. Now, how much time do I have, Netaji? So it's we're already 10 minutes late. Accordingly, I can shorten my talk. How much time do I have?
No problem, sir. Sir, you can take your time. No problem, sir.
Say that. I think because there is a lot that one can talk. So let's see. I think you please warn me at the end of 20 minutes. Please warn me. Yeah.
Sure, sir. We'll do that.
And move on to the cases because that will be like an open discussion. So around
sure,
20
sir.
minutes down the line, just warn me, please. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Sir. Okay. Now let me just put out to you the agenda for today's session, and this is what I hope to cover. So one reason I or rather called to give these talks is because of my involvement in with the journal, which comes out from Mumbai for the last many years, and I have been associated with it since its inception, called the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, and I have sort of engaged with the whole field of ethics. Used to be called medical ethics. Now it is broadly called bioethics. To kind of it can encompasses many more areas now. I think this is something fundamental which I always start with, whether it is talk on any aspects of ethics. That's also for my medical colleagues. So I think we very often tend to confuse between law and ethics. So we must be very clear that ethics is not law. That and not just that, but what we make as something being ethical may not be legal. And in fact, in countries where laws say something, so something is being labeled as the legally right thing to do, may not be considered ethical by doctors, by healthcare professionals, or even sometimes by society. When judges, they often rule on ethical or moral grounds, and will just come, but they often look at ethics principles. So when there is a new area that comes and there is no clear-cut law on that, or the law is very broad, and the judge has a matter which is controversial, they will often refer to ethics principles. So, for example, some of you would know that in the last 5 years or so, there's been a lot of litigation in India in the Supreme Court on the whole issue of end-of-life care, where the famous Aruna Shanbag case, and the whole issue revolves around whether people who are terminally ill should be allowed to, whether the families or people themselves have a right to sort of for their life to be terminated. And there, the Supreme Court has essentially referring to ethical principles. So there's a principle of autonomy, for example, which says that it is finally the patient first, and the patient family who should be deciding what should be their stay and what treatment they would like to when they are ill and even when they are terminally ill. So you will see that if you read the judgments, they will often refer to ethics principles. And the same applies to the principle of justice. So when anything else is, and many other issues are in court and are heard in courts, they refer to the principle of justice. And this is therefore a very important thing to appreciate, and this is actually very, very relevant to transplantation later. That ethics is not just some arbitrary, just somebody's sort of highly evolved moral thoughts that we may imagine to it. Actually, the ethics principles are based on the idea of justice. And that justice idea includes ideas like equity, ideas like, let's say, doing the best for the sickest. And I mean, we'll come to that when we talk about transplantation, how this plays out in transplantation. But so justice plays a very important role. So, for example, when you allocate an organ, and if somebody has to go by ethical principle, it should be based ideally on the principle of justice. And allocation, what it should mean, or what it does mean in many parts of the world, is that the patient who is the sickest should get the organ first. So this is how it plays out. The things, of course, which we immediately need to share with you is that Should ethics be important in healthcare? Why should all of us discuss ethics? Uh, why not leave it to others? And we are professionals, so let's just go by law. So I think there are some very good reasons, and there is something unique about healthcare. So, the first thing is this term called information asymmetry. Don't get intimidated by a complex term. It's very simple actually to understand. So what it means is that in healthcare, what the healthcare worker knows, so what you as a transplant coordinator know, there is a huge gap, right? So you know about transplantation. We know lots of things about transplantation, but the patient and the family knows very little. Of course, now there is a subset of patients, etc. There could be a doctor in the patient, but generally speaking, their knowledge is very limited. Why is this important? Because when you are dealing with people, patients, families, or for that matter, donor families, their understanding and your understanding is a huge gap, because of which you need to take extra care about what you're going to say, what you're going to communicate. Not just that, but I think one has to give allowance to this differential information. And in the if you look at healthcare ethics, or even the whole field of health rights, this is a very important principle that is time and again put forward, that there is huge asymmetry. So a decision making patient or the family is very tough. The second, of course, which is peculiar to healthcare, is that the person is stress. So, for example, when you, just to give a crude analogy, so let's say you go to a shop to buy something, right? You can very patiently ask questions, you can take time, you can go to 10 shops, you can say, okay, let me put off the decision, you can go and ask 20 people, you can do lots of things before you decide to buy something, right? But in healthcare, this is very difficult, because very often it is an immediate decision. And if very often it means life and death. So somebody is in some intensive care, or somebody is sitting in some hospital chamber and is being told that, look, your mother, father, daughter, son, whoever, brother, sister is dying, is going to die soon unless you do this. And this is something that we must constantly keep in mind, which puts huge pressure on the person. And therefore, their decisions are also often affected by the situation. And therefore, from a viewpoint of ethics, it is important that we have some guiding principles because of the situation, because of the peculiar nature of healthcare, which cannot really be compared to many other settings. The third point about the centrality of ethics is trust, and I think most people in around you will sort of decide on medical decisions based on trust. Whether it is a decision to undergo a treatment, not undergo a treatment, get admitted, etc., there is an implicit trust. And that trust is key to the whole process. If there is no trust, nothing will happen. It will constantly be a sort of constant doubts and questions, which can become major impediments in people's decision making. And of course, so we need to remember that this level of trust that you need in healthcare is much higher than going to a shop or going to a hotel, or in many other aspects of life. I mean, of course, you need trust everywhere. But when you are seeking treatment or seeking healthcare, the level of trust needs to be much higher. And finally, this is not so much for individuals, but for a group of professionals, that you cannot enjoy the monopoly that you have. We have a certain monopoly about practicing healthcare, right? You and me allowed to do some things because we are healthcare workers. You have a hospital appointment. I have an hospital appointment. I have a degree. You have a degree. So that credibility and that recognition is very important, and it is something also that that plays out in transplantation. I mean, we'll come to that, but it's very obvious that until you have trust and people trust you as your credibility is very important to their decisions. Right. Now, this is, of course, a little important slide, but don't worry, I'm not going to sort of go into the details of what are these fundamental principles of modern ethics, modern healthcare ethics. But these are the fundamental principles. There are, of course, many, there's a long list of important principles, but these are considered fundamental or basic. They are actually very easy to understand. So one is beneficence, that whatever you do is actually the benefit of the patient, right? Benefit of that patient. There's of course, a huge exception to this, which I don't know whether we will talk about it. I'm really, today at least, not planning to discuss too much about live donor transplantation, because I think it's a detailed topic, but just think about it. I mean, as a live donor, the live donor undergoing an operation does not benefit the live donor. I mean, not directly the live donor. So actually you are in a way transgressing the principle of benefit of a live donor. In fact, the live donor may be harmed by that intervention. So therefore, live donation is an extremely challenging act, and therefore healthcare needs to look at it very, very seriously. So beneficence, the intervention should benefit the patient. Non-maleficent, now this is like a reverse, but it's emphasized that whatever you do should do no harm to the person. Even if you can't do good, do no harm, the principle. And again, if you think in terms of live donor, think about it, you can do a lot of harm to the live donor. All live donors are harmed. There's a cut on their body, there's an operation, they can have complications. So in a way, we are transgressing some of the basic principles because of an exceptional situation. But I think it's important for all to constantly remind ourselves that it's an exceptional situation. The third principle, which is extremely important in modern healthcare ethics, is autonomy. So what does this say? That it is the patient, sometimes the patient's family, if the patient is unable or the person is unable to understand the patient's family, but otherwise is the patient who should be given full information in a language that person understands and agrees to. It has also been emphasized that autonomy is constantly present, which means that every step of the treatment, the person can change his or her decision. And that person's decision is final. So if a person says, I want to stop treatment right now, I cannot carry on. And if that person, one has to go by the ethics principle, we need to honor it. Of course, we try to convince, we try to communicate, we try our best sometimes if we feel we'll be harmed by his decision, but the final decision rests with the person. And this is something even courts have recognized. This legally it's all about consenting, understanding, and autonomy. The final principle is not necessarily about a doctor-patient relationship, but about healthcare policy. And again, I think comes into sharp relief in transplantation in some settings is justice. And I already mentioned that whatever we do in healthcare should be non-discriminatory and should be responsible to the society around us. We cannot be practicing healthcare on our own terms. I mean, you can, but that can be held against you. That is something that is not agreeable from a ethical perspective, and perhaps even from a. So if I'm a hospital, I cannot say that, look, I will only treat certain kinds of patients. I will only, let's say one fine day, I say only treat a certain community, or I will only treat a certain caste. It is not something that is tenable, and therefore it can be held against a person. And in fact, there have been examples where these gone into controversy and it has been held against the healthcare institution or the person as a discrimination. I think in India, this is especially true because we are a country of many. It's a very diverse country with many hierarchies. I think we'll mention that in a moment. Okay, I think there are 2 or 3 other concepts which we need to understand. This is special relations to transplantation, but also related in general ethics. So one is the concept of public good. So what is a public good? So actually, therefore, we need to know what is public. So public is all people in a country, or all people in a state. So there is some aspects of our life which are supposed to be public goods, and they are supposed to be public property, to use a cruder term. And therefore, it is the society as a whole which has to decide what. And in transplantation, I think the very important concept is that a donated organ, in the setting of a deceased donor, is a public good, which means it doesn't actually belong to anyone specifically. It belongs to a group of people. So it belongs to the state. It belongs to the state as it represents the people of that state. Now, why is all this important? Because I'm sure if it has already not happened, it will happen. It's a matter of time that people are going to question, how do you decide to allocate organs? What is the basic principle? Who owns the organ? Who should be the final arbitrator in case of a controversy? And that's where the understanding that this is not a private matter, but a public matter, because when the family of a deceased donor donates an organ, they essentially donate it in the public good. They don't donate it to a person. They don't donate it actually to a hospital. They are not supposed to play any conditions for this. I mean, there are some exceptions made to this, but I'm saying that this is the globally accepted principle. The other is the principle of conflict of interest. Now, this is a principle across our entire life, but work is very important in healthcare, is very important in transplantation. So what is conflict of interest all about? So you as an individual can have 2 interests. One is your interest, let's say, to the patient, because you're answerable to the patient. And the other can be to, let's say, your employer or your boss, or your in a government setup, a department you work in. Now, you have sometimes conflicts in these interests. Conflict comes up when your response to a particular party. So let me explain this by an example. So a patient tells you that he or she is suffering from a severe mental disorder, okay, which makes them at times. And he or she tells you that, look, you're my doctor, I'm telling you this because there is confidentiality between a doctor and patient. Now, realize that the person is a driver of a bus, or let's say a pilot. Now, you realize that if he is mentally abnormal, it is possible that the person on the work or a job, it may affect his ability to do his work or do her work, and in fact lead to danger to others. I don't know, some of the air crashes, the Malaysian Airlines, they when they investigated, they found that the pilot was on treatment for a psychiatric disorder. So what do? You have an interest to the patient. On the other hand, you have the interest who will be harmed. You may have interest to the employer. So therefore, there is a conflict of interest. When you are sitting on a ethics authorization committee, you have interest to the patient because you are working in a hospital and you want the patient to undergo a transplant. But you also have interest to the patient's family if you think that the family is not aware of the problems. Thirdly, you may have interest to your hospital because your hospital is paying you, you're doing a job. So when there are conflicts of interest, there's a lot of literature now how they should be resolved, and I'm not really going to discuss in that. But one thing you must remember is any committee, any body, whether it is the transplant body, whether it is ZTCC, ROTO, SOTO, NOTO, if it is ever analyzed as to how they take decisions, clearly one way to reduce conflicts of interest, which is done in authorization committees, is to have people on that committee who come from diverse backgrounds. So you don't only have transplant doctors. You don't only have government people. You don't only have a certain type of, let's say, technologist. You should ideally have a committee which has people from various backgrounds representing various interests. Therefore, the decision of the committee is objective. If it has been taken by people from various interests. And you must be interested to know that globally, in many healthcare committees, healthcare related committees now, it is mandatory to have representatives from people, lay public, and including patients' rights groups to represent the interests of patients. And in transplantation, there is now a big concept called donor advocate. Somebody who is not employed necessarily by the hospital, who looks after the interests of the donor when we talk of living donation. So this is the conflict of interest issue, which I just thought I should discuss a little because of its relevance to transplantation. Just one more concept, which is also actually easy to understand: transparency. So if anything is of public importance, your waiting list, the way you allot organs, the way you allocate organs, the way you choose one recipient or another, must be transparent to people. It cannot be a private matter. It cannot be secret. You can maintain the secrecy of the name if you wish for confidentiality, but the process cannot be secret. The process has to be transparent for people to accept it and support it. A very interesting concept is called disclosure. So what is disclosure? So disclosure is that if I have a conflict of interest and if I am on a committee or I'm deciding something, I should be disclosing it. So I may be allowed to continue in that committee if I disclose it. So for example, if I am deciding whether a particular hospital should be recognized for transplant or not, and if I am working in another branch of that hospital, and if I am on the inspection committee, ideally I should not be because it's a conflict of interest. But if I am, I should be disclosing that I am working in another branch of that hospital. And my decision still may be taken by the committee, but at least it's disclosed. So people should know that I have a link with that hospital. So all these issues, as I'm trying to give you an example, but these are the kind of issues that if you really start thinking about, come up in our day-to-day life. So Netaji, how long have I spent? Are you guys with me?
Sir, you have enough time, sir. No problem. Please go on, sir.
But you please remind me when I finish 20-25 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Because I can always,
sure, sir.
As I told you, I don't want to just go on and on. Okay. Now,
Sure.
for all this discussion on ethics in transplantation, ethical principles that I talked to you about, what are the lines refer to? What is the source? Because you and me can't always decide what is the best. We can, but we need a source. Yeah, we need a source which is reliable. So here are the sources, and I think we must be aware of the sources. So there are global guidelines. The WHO has some very good guiding principles on donation and transplantation. Yeah. There is a Declaration of Istanbul, which I will talk in little because I'm a part of that global and I have an opportunity to work with that group over the last 2 years, and I will be working with them for another 2 years. So I thought it's good for me to share that with you. You have the ethics, so general code. So for example, the Medical Council of India has a code of ethics, which all doctors are supposed to follow. NATO has guidelines. I don't think NATO has sharp ethics guidelines, but it has guidelines about how organs should be shared, etc. There are sometimes association guidelines. Now, across the world, when you have global organizations, you will see that many of them will have ethics guidelines for their members. So, for example, the Transplantation Society, the ISODP, if any of you know the ISODP, is the International Society for Organ Donation and Preservation. So they have guidelines. So very often these bodies will develop guidelines. Ethics committees of hospitals are also supposed to give you guidelines. Unfortunately, in India, what has happened is that ethics committees actually just look at two things. One is one end they look at clinical trials, if you're doing research, or your authorization committee looks at only giving permissions. But ideally, ethics committee should look at everything. It should look at how should be your consent form, who should be taking consent, what is the setting, who should approach the donor family first, because there are strong elements of ethics involved in all this. So there should be an ethics oversight to what you should do. And I think it's something that we still have a long way to go. And then there are, of course, special laws, and you all know TOHA, whatever you call it, the Transplantation of Human Organs Act, which you and me with regularly, and which has laid down the law itself, and there is a set of rules which are periodically changed. Okay, I mean, this is something I've already said, but this is Arthur Kaplan, who is a transplanticist, and I mean, this is obvious, but I think it needs to be. It is technology. Of course, it is technology, but it is much beyond this. And there's something peculiar to transplantation, right? When I'm seeing a patient for a tumor, I talk to the patient, I operate, patient gets operated, whatever happens. Transplantation is not like that, because in transplantation in organ, somebody else needs to donate an organ. Therefore, transplantation ethics is more important, even more sharp, and even more sort of area which we must address very closely. And this is the special case of transplantation. I don't have to tell you this. It's a life-saving procedure. If patients are desperate, people are waiting for an organ, and they're going to die without that organ. I mean, I don't have to tell all of you this. You know it better than me. There is a scarcity of organs. Therefore, there is a competition. So you need huge ethics guidelines, oversight, rules, whatever you want to call it, to decide how this competition will be resolved. Otherwise, it's going to be a free-for-all. And in a free-for-all, the powerful always get away. Yeah, that's the rule of the world, right? If there is a free-for-all, if there are no guidelines, if it is arbitrary, it is the rich and powerful who will always get access, because they have the means, the connections, and the money. And this is something that in transplantation we see and we need to guard against. What is also special about transplantation ethics? What I already said, that for a live donor who is healthy, who really does not have any disease, you're harming that person. You're harming a normal person. You're harming a young man, young woman who doesn't really need to donate for himself or herself, who may even not be actually very happy to donate for even their relative. think about it, whether you are willing to donate for somebody who's in your family, if you know you can die of the operation. So we have to be very careful about this whole act. The difficult state of brain death, well, the less I can, the more I say, the less it will be. And I have been amazed, and actually, when I came back from England, and I saw disease donation in Europe and in England, I came back and told many of my colleagues that brain stem death transplantation is never going to happen in India, because the whole idea that somebody is dead, and on one hand some doctor is telling that person's family that so and so is dead, brain dead, and that in the next breath, in the next minute, or in the next 10 minutes, you are going to tell that family that please donate organs. I think is an astounding act that families do. If families are donating organs in India, I think it is something astounding about it. In the rest of the world, very often people know about organ donation. Right from their younger days, childhood, they know there is something called organ donation, that people donate. In India, still many people don't know about it. Of course, things are much better than what they were 20 years back, but still, and in spite of that, there are people who donate. And many of them are in private sector hospitals. They have huge bills on their head. They have not always been treated well. Let me tell you that. I am in this setup. Has been treated well. Indian healthcare doesn't treat very well, do they? I mean, they're often shooed away. They're often not allowed inside the ICU. They're given huge bills. People, whatever. It's not a very comfortable place. And in spite of that, they choose to donate. And it just amazes me. But it can also explain, if you turn it around, it also explains why people don't donate, because people see the whole setup as something very often people see the whole setup as something that they don't feel attached to. People don't feel attached to hospitals in India because of the way in which we deliver healthcare, in the way in which we close our eyes, the way in which we allow people to come in for 2 minutes, and all those things. It's almost like people are confined and their family members are kept away. And in COVID, all of you know that it's terrible in COVID, and I think that aggravates the situation. The special case of transplantation in India, and I'm going to discuss this in a little bit detail, is the fact that costs are high, there is limited access, there are monopolies, and therefore all these are confounding factors. Right. Okay, so all the codes on transplantation, ethics codes, basically say these 4 things. I'll not read each one of them, but this is what is emphasized in every code. These can be debated, and we may have our views of that, but no coercion or financial incentivization. Donation should be a financially neutral act. Organs should be for need, superiority, and the deceased organ, donated organ, is a public good. Okay. Now, what's the Indian reality? I've already referred to some of these points. So let me just once more put it to you. Just put as a list. So India is a country of hierarchies and biases, right? This is not the case in many countries. So we are a country which is divided: class, caste, culture, language, gender. A huge gender problem, and we'll look at that. Our health is because of the same health information asymmetry are on one hand have blind faith, on one hand now are distrustful. So there is as I said, a peculiar situation where on people tend to believe in a herd mentality. So very often decisions are taken not by individuals but by families or neighbors or a group of people. There is a retreat of public medicine, no question about that, and there is huge privatization. This has led to the fact that today a large number of procedures are done in the private sector, which means huge costs. And of course, India is extremely peculiar. Some of you would know this, but if not, it's a very important point to remember. And I'm going to come back to this later, maybe during the case. But South Asia, excluding Sri Lanka, perhaps the only 3 countries in the world where in healthcare people pay out of pocket, where you're asked to pay cash, where you're asked to pay a deposit of 50,000 at night at 2 a.m. In most countries of the world, healthcare is delivered by universal healthcare, which means the government supports healthcare, pays, nobody pays at that point, or it's delivered by insurance, which means it is paid by a third party, whether personal, group, public, employer, whatever. So there is really nothing immediate payment. This is very important to understand because I think it plays a lot of role in the way we practice even transplantation. And finally, the Indian healthcare system has regulated, quite contrary to what you may tend to think, the regulation or the rules or the committees in India are very, very minimal. You may tend to think that in India we have hundreds of committees, we are asked for this form, that form. I can assure you that it is one of the minimalist in terms of regulation, auditing. The amount of data a transplant unit has to submit in Europe or the US or in some countries is 50 or 100 times more than you and me have to submit. And they are severely audited for all this data. Okay, so I'll just look at the Declaration of Istanbul, because as I said, I have some connection with it now. So in the 1980s, some of you, I know you are young people, so you must be small, but I'm sure you're aware that there was a time when in the many parts of the world, including India, very much India and very much in the city of Mumbai, where I live, there was and lots of people traveling, buying kidneys, paying money, Arabs traveling to India, and there were lots of scandals. Poor people being duped, poor people being promised money. And this was happening all around the world, what is called organ trafficking. And you would be also interested to know that the WHO estimates that even today, about 10% of transplants done across the world, which is a large number, is done under the form of trafficking. There is some trafficking going on, some payment of money, some deceit. So even today it's 10%. At that time it was probably 30-40%. So therefore the whole world was seized with it, the WHO was seized with it. But I must tell you the history that 2 organizations which are mentioned here, the International Society of Nephrology, ISN, and I don't know whether, is Noble here? Is Noble Gracious joined us? I saw his name, I think.
Yes, sir, I am here. I'm very much
Oh,
here.
Noble is here. Okay. Thank you, Noble. So, I mean, I just wanted to say that ISN, and today you have Vivek Jha from India, who is the president, Noble is also part of ISN, took the lead along with the Transplantation Society, got together a large number of people from across the world and came out with this declaration. What is very interesting about this is that these were transplant professionals. These were not some ethicists. These are not some, as we would imagine, some people from outside the profession. They got together and said, look, we are disturbed. We are worried about what is happening in the world. This is not what we want transplantation to be. And they got together to come together and come out with this declaration. Okay, I mean, some of you may identify some people. I think the people from India, this is Farhat Mozam from Karachi in Pakistan, a very, very active. She's a surgeon who's very, very active in transplantation ethics. Jeremy Chapman here from ISN, etc. And I think this is Prof. Rizvi from Karachi in Pakistan, and some of them. And Vivek Jha is somewhere here. Vivek was a part of this declaration. So this declaration, again, it's all available for you to read. And, again, I'm not going to, but it actually covers many areas of transplantation. So it actually now has been updated professional organizations have now come to the Declaration of Istanbul. So in India, that includes Indian Society of Organ Transplantation, includes the Indian Society of Nephrology, includes the newly formed Liver Transplant Society of India. It includes Mohan Foundation. So this declaration of DICG, the group which looks after this declaration, invites organizations to commit to this declaration. So theoretically, we are all committed to this declaration. Okay, so I'll just quickly now take a few minutes before we go to the cases, because I think this perspective is important. So this is a map of the world, and this is the map from the Global Organ Transplant Registry. It's a very interesting registry. Available for any of you. Just go click and you will see lots of data. Till about 3 or 4 years back, there was no data from India. Now some data has been put in to the efforts of NOTO. So now you'll get data. But what is this? So this shows you what is the transplantation activity. This is not donation. This is number of transplants performed in a country. So the dark green is the maximum number of transplants performed. The white is no transplants or very few transplants, and the light green is few transplants. So India is very much in the few transplants group right now. Whereas you see these areas, Europe, UK, this is Spain, has the highest number of transplants done. But immediate thing we must understand is very interesting data, which says that if you're doing lots of transplants, you are also the leading countries amongst deceased donation. So when people say that Spain has one of the highest rates of deceased donation in the world, Spain also does the highest number of transplants in the world. Then you may say, what is surprising about it? Well, it's not just about the numbers. Spain guarantees free transplantation to all its citizens. Spain ensures that all its citizens, almost all, not everybody, of course, who need a transplant get it. So countries which invest in disease donation and push disease donation traditionally have also invested very heavily in transplantation. So when you tell people that please donate organs, if you tell people that, look, you will get an organ free of cost if you have or somebody else in your family has organ failure, that is very different from saying that please donate your organ. And if the person says, but what happens if my family member gets an organ, you say, oh, I'm sorry, you have to pay 25 lakhs or 30 lakhs for it. So you know what I'm saying? So I think we must understand that in the scenario of healthcare, in the rest of the world, the situation is quite different because very often the recipient process, the transplant is supported by the state and is sort of guaranteed by the state. Now, there's one more quick issue which actually the DICG has looked at, which is what is transplant tourism versus what is genuine travel for transplant. So, there are countries in the world where, of course, transplantation is not done or numbers. So people are going to travel, right, from one country to another. But this is very different from what was happening in the past, which is that people were traveling from one country to another because in their countries, the law was strict. In their country, it was difficult to get an organ. So they would come here, pay money directly or indirectly and get an organ. Now, why is this distinction important? This distinction is important because even today, the global organizations believe that when people travel for transplant, there is a high chance that there is some trafficking involved. Now, I'm not saying that it's common. I'm not saying that it is. But please remember that when there is a person coming from some other country who doesn't know the language, who cannot speak a word of English, and you're working through a translator and he says, this is my nephew or this is my second nephew or some such thing. And I have myself had an opportunity to see some patients like that who say, okay, you can't take this nephew. I have 3 other nephews waiting to donate organs, etc. So we just need to be, our antenna need to be up as to what is happening now. On the other hand, many of our hospitals take pride in medical tourism because it's revenue. So I think there is that dichotomy. Hospitals like to do foreign patients because there is revenue, but the more you have foreign patients, the more are the chances that you may slip up, because it's very difficult for you to counter check on what happens in many countries. Now this is the one issue which is, of course, very, very unique to India. And since Noble is here, I may as well speak for 2 minutes, because Kerala has actually tried to move forward on this issue. And this is something very important for transplant coordinators, which is that when you are now talking of disease donation, what happened was that the Transplantation of Human Organs Act was an act which linked brain death with donation. So in the same act, you had brain death defined, and in the same act, you had disease donation defined. Now that's a big problem, because brain death has something to do outside of disease donation, right? You can have a brain dead person who is not fit to donate, or who doesn't want to donate, or who has nothing to do with donation, and still we need to actually consider it as brain death, because if it is brain death, we need, ideally, if you can take a donor, a brain dead donor, to the OT and remove organs and shut off the ventilator. If they don't donate organs, you should be able to shut off the ventilator. It's absolutely crystal clear logic. But the problem is that since it was in the same act, there is a view in India which says that you should only consent families who donate. So therefore, if you go to a family, say, please donate, family says no, you are telling the family that, look, somebody is dead, brain death is death. They say, okay, no, thank you, please give us the body. You say, no, we can't give you the body. So then the family says, but you just told me that the person is dead. So that means you're still ventilating the person. You say, yes. You say, that what does that mean? You just told me that the person is dead. I don't know whether any of you has had this discussion, but it's a terrible discussion. And what it finally leads to is people are convinced that you ventilate dead patients because you may be charging per every hour. So I think it's a deadly issue. We have shied away from it for many years. And I think Noble Gracious and the Kerala group has taken a step forward by actually coming out with a clear-cut GR on this. Other states still are sitting on the fence, and I shudder to think what is the fallout of these things if there has already not been a fallout. And one only hopes that this thing gets sorted out. The other confounder in South Asia I've been referring to, so I will not repeat it, which is the fact that transplantation is performed in the private sector largely, and therefore it works by the rules of the private sector. So it's all largely about revenue, income, costs, etc. The costs are passed on to the donor, the retrieval costs are passed on to the donor, etc. So it's all about the economy of the private sector hospital, and that itself leads to challenges. The gender equation I've referred, this is data from India, plucked out from some studies. So it's very interesting. Look at this. Disease donation, 60-40. Live donation, 80-20. So obviously more female live donors, more male deceased donors. So there is something happening there. Okay, costs of transplantation. Just to say, this slide was meant for actually a global audience. Just to say that this is the average income of an Indian, and these are the costs of transplant. So 95% of Indians cannot actually afford it. Some of them beg, borrow, steal, whatever, sell their whatever house, etc., and get it done. Okay, we have discussed this. Should I discuss this? No, except that people are not stupid. People are not fools. People read newspapers. So therefore, we must understand that when the media supports us, and I must share this with you, that media has been very supportive in India of the deceased donation. Every deceased donor, the media writes about it. But if we expect that we will not play by the rules, if we expect that when that happens, the media will not write about it, that's not going to happen. So I think we need to be very careful. This is all about public perception. This is an issue which keeps on coming up. Maybe we can take it up in the case discussion. Okay. Allocation of deceased donor organs is an issue. I told you that globally the clear-cut guideline is severity. In India, for first few years, we used other criteria. Waiting time chronology in some Mumbai, for example, rotation among centers in the South India. These are not ethics-based criteria. These are practical criteria. Hospital getting the organ first. This is a practical criteria. This is not an ethics-based criteria. There's no reason for the hospital to get its own organ if some other hospital has a more severe patient or a serious patient. Yes, it is true that in liver, patients with fulminant hepatic failure get the organ first, but even otherwise, there is really no good reason, but we do it because we want to promote organ donation. A slide which is one is about how transplantation in India is skewed in very few parts of India, and therefore people have to travel. There's hardly any transplantation in this part of India, hardly any transplantation here, so travel long distances. So therefore, when we talk about the cost of transplant and we say our package is 25 lakhs or 20 lakhs, that's completely inaccurate because they have to travel, stay, family has to stay, etc. So you should easily add 5 lakhs to the transplant package because huge costs of staying in a city. Okay, a quick word. We cannot help but talk about COVID. Is down, overwhelmed health system. There is a risk to the live donor. So what we are going to see, if you're not seeing it all, is that there is going to be increased demand-supply gap. There are going to be reduced donation, and this is the vicious circle. Because when there is increased demand-supply gap, there is reduced donation rates. People push unethical practices. I'm not talking of people as in public. I'm saying that it is even sometimes the transplantation community. It is even sometimes hospitals. It is even sometimes surgeons. And this leads to this vicious circle because then we cross boundaries, we break the rules, and the credibility goes down. So I'm going to stop here and we are at 6:36. So Nitaji, should we go to the cases?
Yes, sir. Please, sir.
Oh, I would have liked to have the audience. So let me see whether I can do something. Do the cases without me seeing everybody is going to be very challenging. Okay, so maybe I will not show you the case. Okay, is that okay?
Yes, sir. Please go on,
Because
sir.
I want responses. Now, how do we do that? Okay, I think that is important. Box. No, I want responses from people. So, you know what I'm saying. So, okay, let's just try. I mean, can't have an ideal. Let's try. Okay. So let me just start with my first case. Okay, so this is a very common situation. Who needs early liver transplantation. The family is counseled about live donor transplant because, they are in a part of the country where deceased donor organ is not going to be available soon. And they have a donor. So we are the hospital is looking for a live donor. The family has a 28-year-old son and a 32-year-old daughter. Both are matching group. The son says he has just joined a new job. He can't get leave because he has a new job. Okay, have you just joined a new job? Have you heard that before? Okay, so can't get leave. Okay, fair enough. Okay, so the daughter is keen. She's fit to donate. So we discussed the family. We explained the risks, the family and the daughter. Okay, so the daughter agrees. Now what happens is that her husband comes in and he says, but look, we have small children at home. And how can you have my wife donate and have a big operation? We have small kids. I work. I don't have time. My parents are also not very happy with this. So what is to be done? The daughter says, actually, look, that's okay. I'm okay with this. I want to save What will your hospital committee do? What does your hospital committee do? We've had cases like this. I mean, these are not fictitious cases. What did your hospital committees do? Will they do? Okay, Netaji, you start first.
Well, sir, as you said, we had similar cases. In fact, as a matter of choice, women being chosen as a first choice rather. In fact, in one of your presentations also, you said there is a gross discrepancies between the live donor and the cadaveric.
Netaji, sorry. You tell me what you will do as a transplant coordinator.
Well, sir, we will discuss in detail about the risks involved in this live donations, and we'll explain the son to take that.
Look, those risks have been discussed. That is a given. The daughter says, I'm willing to take the risk. The husband says that, look, she cannot have kids. What are you going to lose my wife? My kids will have problems if she gets a complication. The daughter says, look, you take my consent and go ahead. Don't save my father. So what will you do? What are you going to do? Practically, what are you going to do?
We'll take the help of the donor surgeon, sir.
Husband's concern is...
Okay, hold on. So Netaji just said you will take the help of the donor
surgeon in explaining the process and make understand the husband that there is nothing which is going to help, interrupt the children's life.
Oh, really? There's really nothing? Are you sure?
Okay. Sir, yeah.
Concern for side plays a very important role because he is the NOK for the lady.
Is the what?
The next of kin.
As per the thorax.
Or the father is the next of kin?
No, but married, it comes to the husband as a next of kin always acts.
Yeah, because he's legally, yes.
Any other views on this?
Sir, my view is there because I had kidney transplantation like this. Wife wanted to donate and she was having 2 small kids and maternal having her to donate, but still she was ready to donate. So in this case, my view is that why coordinator should not talk to the brother or the son of that family. So job is the secondary thing. If he is really wanted to save the life of father, then job is the secondary thing. This is what my view, and I will first try to convince that son why you are not there, because females are the easily available for the donation, which is seen by everybody, and I will try.
So let's go by the ethics principles first, right?
Yeah.
So we looked at the ethics principle. There's a principle of autonomy, which is that if the daughter, the wife of the husband who is refusing, but her father is to be is an adult, she understands the implications, and it is her decision to donate, right? So if we are clear that the consent is voluntary, by the principle of autonomy, it is only her who can decide. So husband being the next of kin is a social construct,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It is the autonomy of the person. Are you really telling me that every decision in your life, women in this order? So, when it comes to a conflict like that, from a pure ethics principle,
For the future marital life, also.
Okay. No. So I'm not denying that there is a problem here, and therefore I put the case to you. You're right. So marital life. So okay. So let's put it this way. When we, once I had discussed this in a global forum, right? And, very interestingly, people from Europe and the US can't understand what we are talking. They can't even understand, because they say, what do you mean marital life? What do you mean husband is deciding? Because there the assumption is that the woman has her own independent agency to decide. So it is a cultural construct. I agree with you that we have a cultural construct of, meaning, I'm sorry to put it this way, that we have created a cultural construct that it is the husband who has to decide. By the way, what if the husband is a donor and wife does not agree? Any views on that?
No, he will go firmly and donate.
Okay. So,
I think there is
that's why
And
no
they will not.
implications for that.
They will not listen to the wife's work.
wife will usually not object. That's what somebody may be saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
clearly,
yes,
this is a question of gender. This is a question of gender imbalance. Suggesting, therefore, that you talk about gender imbalance. But if this case goes to ethics committee, if I'm in the ethics committee, I ideally rule that it is the wife's decision to donate. Now, what is the sorry, somebody's put up something on chat. So for the wife is not the only resort to for the husband, the wife is not the only resort to save her father's life. What do you mean? There is somebody else. The son, you mean the brother? Okay, so brother is saying he is busy. He's busy with his job. So nobody touched on that. That why is the brother not being asked? So there's some differential treatment there, right? Again, that's the differential treatment. So this gender is gender. I'm just saying that in this case, in the hospital I work, and I was horrified. Our committee actually called the husband who said, I'm not happy. And the permission was refused. I was horrified. Yeah, I think, what if the wife threatens that to save her father's life? If he refuses, she will divorce him. I'm just saying, I'm just putting a potential fallout, right? So I think these are not at all simplifying the issue, but if you want to put an ethics principle, is informed consent. Does the wife understand? It is her autonomy. There is no question of husband's consent. I know that there are authorization committees who do this. I think it is ethically not tenable. And if the world knows this, they will be shocked by this. There is no reason for husband. Husband can be informed. That's very different from saying husband's consent. Anybody wants to make a quick comment on this?
Sir, sorry to interrupt. Actually, we had a case he was even a soldier and he was an ex-serviceman and the daughter was willingly to donate also. But the husband came and threatened that he will abandon her. And finally, the son also refused and the daughter, finally, we had to go with an ABO incompatible transplant with the wife.
Sure. So I'm just saying that you and me cannot change these things overnight. I'm just pointing out to you one of the ethical principles that is involved, which is autonomy, informed consent, etc. Yeah. Okay. I think let's move to the next case because okay. So this is case number 2. This is a very famous case. Okay. This was recorded in the newspapers. Actually, some of you have read it, and I have presented this case. I think in a forum in India and in a global forum, but because this is all in the newspapers. So there was a 62-year-old. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to remove this screen of the. Okay, so is it better now? My PowerPoint. Yeah, trying to do is to read it, and I am not succeeding. But our country, cultural state is still in primitive state to see man and woman as individuals. Absolutely, you and me can't change it. If you are from Kerala, you are saying this because you are in Kerala, but the rest of the country has to catch up. Okay. Okay. So 62-year-old executive of a very well-known multinational company. His annual income was 82 lakhs. This is, we know because all this was public domain, needs a kidney transplant. The patient's 2 sons live in the US, not willing to donate due to professional compulsions, whatever that means. So seeks permission for a second-degree relative who is a nephew, who is a security guard in a neighboring state. This is Gujarat, whose annual income was of that security guard is 2 lakhs, and the family presents him as the donor. During the committee hearing, the donor's wife is interviewed. She seems confused and unaware of details of the family members. Now, you are interviewing this family. Forget about the committee. Let's forget about the committee now. So you're a transplant coordinator. and this family is presented to you, where the recipient is what I told you and the donor is what I told you. What do you do? What do you do next? Okay, so let me put it another way. You find some discrepancy between the recipient social status and the donor social monetary status. They are relatives. They are a distant relative, nephew, niece, but huge difference. And this was a real case. He was apparently a security guard in Gujarat. So what would you do? Everybody's gone quiet.
Hello.
So difficult. Yeah. This case is sent to you first, right? Hopefully by your surgeons, or the surgeons call you and say, "Arey, permission le lo, chalo." I hope not. I suspect they do. I suspect they do. Get quickly. We want.
They do, sir. They do.
Week, right? And if things go wrong, we will catch your neck. If things go wrong, you will be hauled up in court. Well, yeah, that's an issue, right? So you better protect yourself. So what will you do? No response. Come on.
Hello.
Yeah, tell me. Yeah, please.
We'll have to see if there is any kind of a money transaction, financial transaction between them.
Yeah, so you are still suspect of financial transaction. Fair enough. But how will you go about it?
So definitely we'll call donor
Yeah.
and the family of the donor. We'll try to counsel them about pros and cons of transplant, organ donation, the risk involved,
Right.
the consequences.
Right.
And after hearing and after discussing everything, suppose a family is also agreeing and donor is also willingly giving organ, part of organ, and definitely as donor is an adult more than 18 years of age, and if he is willingly ready to give, and if wife is also agreeing with parents and other family members after counseling, after
No, all that is.
discussing.
So, see, all that is acceptable. My question is this: you are suspecting that there is
Financial transaction.
So now, as a transplant coordinator, do you want to look into it, or you want to just say, okay, that's not my concern?
No, we have to look into it.
Okay, so how will you look into
Yes,
it? Is my question.
So we ask them for their IT return or their salary statement or their
So
bank
that is
statement,
I
and
already
if we see there is discrepancy or say there is like
No, there is
a
a
huge
discrepancy.
mismatch, the huge mismatch, then definitely, sir, we will ask them about this question also. And sir, you just come to know from the patient and the donors conversation, from their conversation, their body language and everything.
Okay.
You just come to know there is something going on.
Right.
There will be a financial transaction.
Can I just? Can I? Just,
No, Rekha, I think it's already probably sir is giving a situation where you actually know everything. So what are we going to do next?
So definitely we will inform the committee. We'll inform the management.
Okay. So what
We
can I
have to
ask?
inform
Sure. Can I ask you? Can I ask everyone here? So suppose you suspect this and you are interested as a transplant coordinator to stop this, right? See, I'm assuming that you do not want this to go ahead if it is purely based on financial transactions, right?
Yes, sir.
Therefore, what are the ways you can intervene at that point? So does anybody know of methods where used in transplant globally to ensure that the donor is not under financial incentivization or other forms of coercion? It's a step that you can do. We have actually done it, and sometimes it gives you it brings out the issues. So what can be done for the donor?
I have a small
Sure.
across many occasions like this kind of situations. Even though our coordinator wanted to communicate to the surgeons, the treating nephrologists, or doctors, and most of the times our voice are not heard, taken for consideration.
Right.
And most of them they with us because they don't want to complicate. As you said, the recipient is well off and they want to go ahead with the transplant. That's the most of the situation. I believe all my friends will agree with that. Though we want to bring it up, even they have come across.
So, no, I completely understand what you're saying.
Sir, only thing what we can do is we can highlight this point to the committee and the management.
Sure. So I think if you want to maintain your individual sense of independence, there is conflict of interest because you are under pressure to get fast clearance. But if you want to, you can mention this that you suspect it. Yeah. But
Sir,
one of the methods used globally is that you can choose to inform the donor family and the donor that any form of commercial trading is illegal in India. That is one thing. You can choose to consciously inform them. The second is that there is a process wherein you can give create a situation of opt-out for the donor. And we've done this. And the way to do it is, and this is not just for commercial incentivization, but also if you think the person is being pressurized by the family, right?
Yes, sir.
And
Yes,
sometimes
sir.
you can sense that is to speak alone to the donor and say, look, and this has to be done by your transplant team
Yes,
with
sir.
you,
Yes, sir.
and say, look, if you are under pressure, we will give you a medical reason to opt out.
Yes, sir.
We will
Yes,
say
sir.
that you're not fit.
Fit.
So if you're under pressure, tell us. So you are not put in an embarrassing situation
Yes, sir.
or a difficult situation. And there are individuals who will tell you that please do that. Yeah. So
Yes,
I
sir.
mean,
Yes,
I'm just
sir.
assuming that the
Sir,
system
I have,
wants to
Sir,
do
we
this.
have done it.
Sir.
We have done it.
You have done it.
sir,
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Somebody wants to.
one more point I would like to add on here.
Yeah.
If we say that there is an option called opt-out system, and it has been always not uniformly followed all the hospitals. If X hospital says some reasons for not accepting this as a donor for some reason, opt-out some, then the next hospital say, hey, you're fit.
Yeah, your voice
You
is
can
not
go ahead
clear.
with donation.
Voice is not.
That
Yeah, your voice, there is some, when you're using that mic or something. Yeah, now it's a little better. Just try again. Well, your voice is.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, so.
Hello. Sir, what he wants to say.
Can I just answer this trying to convey?
Yeah.
No, sir. A hospital says that with the help of the surgical or medical team, we convey the same to the donor family, saying that we can get you out of the system.
Yes.
Just for some medical reasons.
Yeah.
Now, B hospital is ready to do the same
With same
operation
donor.
in their
Right.
hospital,
Right.
and we just get in a different situation where the doctors are proved wrong.
Yes.
Sir, I have another situation, sir. Now here you are saying that the
Right.
donor itself is, not so great in terms of consenting for coming forward for the donation. Now, what if the donor is convinced, even with his lower economic background, he is convinced that with taking all kind of risks, getting to know about all the risk involved in this procedure, he still comes forward for donation just because for economic benefits. Now, how shall we get this, take this forward? Because the transplant team will also be interested to know that, yes, the donor is convinced, the family is okay, fund is ready, let's go on with the transplant, just in case of only for the numbers. So how shall we, as a transplant coordinators, can fix this?
Well, I was hoping nobody asked me that question, but since you have asked now, we have to deal with it. Maybe I will ask Noble to respond. But so you're saying that that there is a consent, but there is money exchanging hands, right?
Yes.
And the transplant team also says go ahead.
Yes, because they're not worried about what's happening behind the family discussion. Because let us take this case itself, sir. The two sons are available, but still they don't want to donate.
Yeah, so let's get on with it. So, okay, so I think here we are coming to a situation which is very tricky now, and I completely understand that we work in hierarchical systems, and that's a problem because as a transplant coordinator, you are an employee, right? You're not a third party. If you're a third party, you can express your views more frankly and maybe express a view which is contrary to the team's views. And therefore, the world has also, they have donor advocates. Therefore,
Correct.
they have a system of people in the organization committee who are not on the transplant. And they are supposed to do these jobs. Yeah. So why should the burden be taken by you, especially because you know that the system is geared towards numbers? I have no answer for that except to say that if I were you, now you already have your association, right? You have this association now. I think it's time for transplant coordinators to link with each other, get to each other, so that hospitals are also aware that there's a group of transplant coordinators who think alike, who should be and I mean, I fought for this in the ZTCC in Mumbai with very limited success. But even today, when committees are formed at the level of whatever, SOTO, ROTOs, whatever, it's unfortunate that transplant coordinators are not part of those committees. Yeah. So I think you'll have to work your way up on that so that you have the backing of external agencies to put forward your viewpoint. Because if you are exposed only in your hospital to your employees, it's a lost cause. Correct. What happens globally is that there are third-party bodies. Audit is very strong. If you're found to be doing this, they will quickly de-recognize your hospital and so on and so forth. So I have no one single answer, and I can identify with exactly what you are saying. Now,
Sir, just to add on, sir, can I just add on one more question linking to the same issue, sir? Now we have separate teams to declare brain death and do a transplant in deceased donor transplant. We have a separate third party to authorize live donor transplant. Right. Now, why not in TOA itself? There is no clear indications or clear informations about a transplant coordinator involving in both sides, sir.
Very important. So ideally, so the European model is that the donor coordinator is different from the recipient coordinator. So there's the conflict of interest is reduced.
Correct, sir.
Well, ideally, that's what we should move to. Hospitals should move to, and you're absolutely right. This should come from the authorities, may not come from the hospitals. So please represent this. I will support you. And since Noble is in the meeting, you can start in Kerala, because Kerala anyway leads the way. So so you're absolutely right. I think this conflict of interest of being donor and recipient coordinator is a big problem. Is a big problem, because you also identify sometimes emotionally with the recipient, right?
Correct, sir.
And you find it terrible to, you say isko transplant milna chahiye. So you also become emotionally connected. So I think this is okay. Somebody saying transplant coordinator became party to crime. Yeah, but all I want to say is that the transplant coordinator is in a small, big wheel. So I think, okay, so somebody's saying donor coordination should be done by ICU coordinator. Fair enough. So the model in some countries is that number one, transplant coordinators are not transplant coordinators. They are grief counselors. Number two, they are ICU coordinators. So they are not seen as people who only come to the ICU for donors. It's very important. We have discussed this ad nauseum, but this doesn't happen on the ground, that transplant coordinators are called to the ICU only when there is a potential brain death. This model will not work, because people will soon start saying, "Are dekho aa gaya donor ke liye." Look, this guy is waiting for us. And it's a terrible thing. If you are an ICU social worker who also does grief counseling, so people ask me, what is the trick in Spain? And we will not, I mean, if you want, we can talk some other time about how Spain has done it. There are many things, yeah. And if you talk to the TPM, DTI people, but they don't tell you something, which is very important, is that in Spain, transplant or donation of deceased donation is a part of what is called end of life care protocol. So the entire ICU is geared to end of life care. So they will identify those who are terminally ill. Some will be brain dead, some will not be brain dead. They will consent them for withdrawal of care. They will talk to the family, the doctors, and during that process, they will say, look, we are withdrawing care, we can terminate care. If you would like to donate organs, you can donate if you are brain dead. If you're not brain dead, we can think of a DCD, controlled DCD, and donate organs. That is very different from what we do. So we have to integrate brain death recognition and donation as a part of end of life care, which should become the philosophy of the ICU, which is not happening. So somebody says a name called are vultures when you enter. My goodness. Okay, so I mean, I'm sorry about that, but okay, should we go on to the next case? There are two more, but we can at least cover one more.
Yes.
Should we? 7 o'clock, beyond 7. What do you want to do?
So we'll take this, sir.
The third case? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So this is also actually what happened. A 27-year-old construction worker fell off a scaffolding, admitted to ICU of a private hospital in a small city. ICU doctor identified brain death, family approached for donation. Consent for organs. Family said, please give us a concession in the hospital bill, then we will consider donating. What's the view? I'm sure you get requests like this.
Very common, very common.
Very common. Okay. Extremely common. Even worse is that the donor is in some hospital and you say, we will transfer you to our hospital and give you free treatment. Even,
Yes, sir.
unfortunately, that is common. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what do you want to do? How do you deal with it? Don't tell me what happens, but what should we be dealing with? It. So here's the question. The question is very big, that it is said that in deceased donation, the recipient is going to get an organ, recipient's life is going to be saved, the surgeons are making money, hospitals are making money. Why not the donor family also get some money or get some concessions? Right?
Free treatment.
Free treatment, concessions, money for...
Dr. Sanjay sir, good evening.
Yeah.
May I intervene, sir?
Please.
Sir,
Tell me.
good evening. Sir, like you say, this is what about the concessions. There is some hospitals who, in Delhi especially, there is some corporate hospitals who create the policies, develop the policies whenever there is a brainstem death in their ICUs, and they go ahead with the donations without any request and they come voluntary for the donations. The policy is what they exempted some charges of the ICU cares and all. That is by default. That is what happens by default.
Right.
Apart from this, I have some add-on on your questions. There is many times it happens when the person is died or brain death declared in the private hospitals. And immediately when our family is aware that now my patient is brain dead, there is sometimes it happens in the private hospital, they want to shift the patient to the public hospitals due to this burden also.
Right. Okay, so I just want to respond by saying 2-3 things. Number one, I said it in my talk that we are unfortunately in a country or a subcontinent where there is two parallel systems in a big way. In many countries, there's no private and public, right? There is one sort of uniform system where patients are shifted not because of money, but because of specialization. So we have to face this burden. I just wanted to raise this issue of incentives for deceased donor families, because very often, and in fact, the government of India at one stage actually have seriously considering that donor families could be compensated. So there is another question, which is of direct incentives versus indirect incentives. All I want to say is that without trying to impose my views about whether there can be some form of support for a donor family, because intuitively, even from a justice angle, if somebody is poor, intuitively from a justice angle, you can argue that please relieve them the burden of the hospital bill, right? So all I want to say is that whenever any country has attempted to give any form of compensation for deceased donation, it hasn't worked. It has not really led to increase in donations. What, of course, countries have done is that the costs incurred on the donor or the costs incurred on the family, which are what are called as neutral costs. So costs of actually, because there's no hospitalization costs in those countries, but costs of funeral, costs of the family's time of work, whatever, is considered as neutral costs and is compensated. But anything beyond that as incentivization is still not. Now here it's a different situation. A donor maintenance fee may be collected from recipient hospital. That's what Jacob says. All is to be collected. Fair enough, we are doing that. I think Maharashtra is doing that. The question simply was whether we should incentivize in any way deceased donation by linking it to the family. Okay, linked to this case. So the donor is in a small city. The organs are being retrieved. The heart can only be brought by flight, and the flight cost is 5 lakhs. So in the recipient hospital, there are 4 recipients, but only the 4th on the list can afford the flight cost. What should we do? Again happens, I guess.
Yes, sir.
Should we
So
jump
we
the queue?
give
Should we
heart.
jump the queue?
Yes, sir. But we have to, because then the previous 3 patients, if they are not affording flight charges, then we have to go to 4th patient.
Yeah, so it's a compulsion based on our system. But again, ethically, you are jumping the queue, you are going down the list. It's a violation, right? It says something simply this, that we are a big community, and the transplant community in India is not small, and there is a lot of money. By the way, there's a lot of money with hospitals. Why not create a fund for transport of organs and not put that on the recipient? I don't think it's impossible. It is very easily possible, but we have not done it, right? Flight charges is not something that happens every day, right? So you can maintain, because in the city, usually you go by the waiting list, usually. So similarly, you can give to force whether the organ is wasted in current scenario, fair enough, but constantly work on trying to implement justice. And, we actually tried it in Maharashtra to get Air Force to support organs. Did not work out. We also tried for philanthropy. Some of them were interested, but it is not, I think COVID interrupted a lot of things. But
Yes, sir.
third party do this, because you're again relating this. Yeah. Now I just want to wrap up, because we are well past time, by saying that, so if you realize that there are peculiar problems in India, not all the lines of the world can be applied in India very easily. Having said all this, not to engage with these issues, not to try and come to a consensus, is not only us. And if we at least discuss it amongst our own community, we may be taking steps forward. Because otherwise, what is going to happen is we will be individually facing problems, we will individually face burdens, and it will lead to a lot of stress. So you and me cannot change overnight the situation in South Asia vis-a-vis the cause, the private sector. I mean, there are many things that we discussed. But we can certainly identify the issues, bring out some guidelines, try to adhere to them, try to reduce the problems, try to at least certain problems which are solvable. For example, what Kerala has done for the disconnection of the ventilator. At least these problems we should move towards. So I think we'll stop here. Even I need to leave. But if there is any pressing question, you can write to
Sir,
me.
can I just take one last question, sir?
Yeah.
Can I just take one last question, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so now this is something which is very peculiar from this part of the country. Now you said the donor family, in one of your slides said the donor family has would be giving the unconditional consent,
Right.
but there are few things which has to be respected.
Right.
Now, this question is a common question from all of us from this part of the country. In fact, one of my colleague texted me,
Yeah.
and this is also a very pressing question for all of us. Now,
Yeah.
there is can the donor family say that this particular donor, I mean, the organs can be donated to only one geographical area, sir?
Right.
Often,
So
we see
this is-
that the donor family are consulted for Indians only.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, this is again not peculiar to India, by the way. So there is a lot of discussion on what is called conditional donation. There is something called conditional donation. There's something called directed donation. Yeah. And I think at one stage written on this, we have faced this problem. From a purist viewpoint, donations should not be conditional because it's an act where actually the donor family should not even know whom it is going to. I think the real danger in India is that it can be a huge slippery slope. So I don't know how to express it more frankly, but in India, people say, I want to give to my caste, to my religion, to my state, to my whatever. So moment you go into this territory, you must be open then to a huge slippery slope. And I will not go into that. Now, of course, then you'll say you lose an organ. Well, yes. But you keep the bigger perspective. I mean, who says that one organ less? I mean, every organ is important. Please don't misunderstand me. But if one organ less, it means keeping alive a principle which affects everybody. It may be better to not get into that because I think it's a slippery slope. Some countries have debated this. Directed donation is something, there is something called. So, I mean, then of course, there is a whole question of Good Samaritan donation in live donation. So, there are ways to analyze all this, but I think it will be a slippery slope. I would not suggest it.
Thank you so much, sir.
So
In fact, we have
Yeah.
Yes, sir. We should, sir. In fact, it has gone beyond our time limit.
We can do it once more later on if you have.
Yeah,
We can do some more or whatever. Sure. So
You-
I invite all of you to. So we have a newsletter, Netaji, of the DICG,
Yes, sir.
which you send me the email list. I will start sending it to all of you. Yeah.
Sure, sir.
So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much,
thank
sir.
you,
It was
all
really
my
pleasure
colleagues.
having you here, sir.
Thank you, Noble, if you're still there, and continue your good work in Kerala. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.